Okay, so today we're going to be looking at graphing graphs of sine and cosine and then writing their equations based off of those graphs. So instead of giving an equation and writing it like we did in the last video, now I'm going to give you a graph and you're going to write the equation. So the first thing I want to start by looking at, obviously, as you can see, we have a unit circle here. So I want to use that to pull our pattern of sine and cosine that we've been using in class. So we have been focused on our four quadrant points. At 0, pi over 2 pi, 3 pi over 2, and then again back at 2 pi to give us those 5 critical points. So for sine, and if we remember, all of the points on the unit circle are cosine comma sine. Then I know the pattern for sine is going to be 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0. And the pattern of cosine is going to be 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. Now, the reason I want to highlight this is because when we get to the graphs, there might be an amplitude or a vertical shift, and those are all things that we're going to need to identify. And potentially, I'll give you a problem where I'll ask you to write both a sine equation and a cosine equation. Obviously, one of those will have a phase shift. So what's important is to use this pattern to help you identify when it's sine and when it's cosine. So looking at this pattern of sine, right? 0, 1. So I'm in the middle, I go to the max, I go back to the middle, I go to the min, and I end at the middle. So anytime you see that you are in the middle of your y values, in the middle of your max and min, that's going to be the start of sine. Whereas cosine starts at the max. So anytime you're picking a point at the max, that's going to be cosine. In addition, it could also be at the minimum, right? If we reflect over the x-axis, cosine would start at the minimum. So that would be negative cosine. So if you're at the max or the min, that's going to be the cosine equation. So again, if you're trying to determine the period, right, you could follow any of these patterns, right? And notice that when I'm talking about max and min, I'm talking about y values, right? I'm not talking about x, my angles, I'm talking about y values. So let's look at an example. So if I'm looking here, I typically like to start by finding my midline. Now your midline is just what it sounds like. It's the middle y value. So in between your max and your min. Right, so I have a max of 2, a min of negative 2, so I know the middle of that is going to be 0. So my midline is at 0. Now, what's nice is your midline is actually your vertical shift, right? Because if we think back to our pattern, the middle is at 0. So anytime we multiply by an amplitude, that 0 doesn't change. But if I add or subtract that vertical shift last, that's going to change my 0, that's going to change my middle. So that's going to be my midline. So here, because my midline is 0, I'm going to have no vertical shift. From there, the next thing I like to find is my amplitude, and my amplitude is the distance from my midline to the max or to the minimum, either one. I typically go to the max. So from my midline of 0 to my max of 2, obviously that's 2, so my amplitude is going to be 2. Now, from there, I typically like to find my period. So your b value is nowhere to be found on the graph, right? The only way we can find our b value is if we know our period. So in order to find my period, there are two different ways you can go about this. So you can always, always, always go max to max, right? Because cosine starts at the max, goes all the way down to the min, and then ends at the max. So anytime you have two maximums, that distance is going to be one period. Okay, but another way you can look at it is again those five critical points. So I can see at this y-axis, I start in the middle. So that's making me think sine. And the pattern of sine, right, goes middle, max, middle, min, and ends at the middle. So I can use those five critical points to tell me one period, which tells me that I'm going to have a period of 4 pi. So either of those two ways, those will always, always, always work. Either of those will get you your period. We know here our period is 4 pi. So period is 4 pi, that is not our b, right? The only sort of relationship with b that we know is that our period is always 2 pi over b. So since our period is always 2 pi over b and it is currently 4 pi, I'm going to set the two equal to each other in order to find b. So I just multiplied to solve for b, and I ended up getting a b value of 1/2. So when I'm writing my equation, I'm going to use that b value of 1/2. Now, what's super, super, super nice about this is your vertical shift, your amplitude, and your period are always the same, no matter whether you're writing a sine or cosine equation. So no matter which equation I write, these three values are always going to be the same. Well, technically four if you include your period. But your vertical shift, your amplitude, and your b value will always stay the same, whether it's sine or cosine. So looking here, I see on my y-axis, right, my y-intercept is in the middle. And I know that sine starts in the middle. So if I wanted to write a sine equation, using all the values I just found, I would have y equals my amplitude of 2, then sine, my b value of 1/2, so 1/2 x, and then that's it because I don't have a vertical shift. So you can put a plus 0 at the end, but you don't need to. So that would be my sine equation, right? No phase shift. If I wanted to include a phase shift, if I wanted to write a cosine equation, right? So cosine starts at the max or at the min if you're doing negative cosine. So if I wanted to write a cosine equation, right, let's say I wanted to start at this point right here, I would set it up the same way. I would still have y equals 2 cosine of 1/2 x. But then I'd have to figure out this phase shift right here. So if I'm looking over, I'm just going to erase this so I can see a little bit better. So between 0 and 2 pi, there are 4 marks. So that's telling me that every single mark is pi over 2. Now, where you have to be careful, I see that this is to the right pi. So I know instead of addition here, I'm going to need to put subtraction, because inside our equation, right, we need to put opposites. So if I'm going to the right, it should be minus, but it's not minus pi, right? Because our phase shift is always C over B. And we have a B value. Our B is not 1. So C over B, so C over 1/2 has to equal pi, right? Because if I just plug in pi, when I divide that by 1/2, that becomes 2 pi, and then it's no longer a correct phase shift. So if I keep change flip right here, that tells me 2c equals pi. So I'm going to divide by 2 and get that c equals 2. So in my equation, I'm going to have minus pi over 2. And there would be my two equations. So if we look at another example, again, I would start with my midline, which I can see a max of 1/2, a min of 1/2. So I know that my midline is once again going to be 0. Amplitude is going to be 1/2. From there, for this problem, I think it's going to be a little bit easier to go from max to max. So in order to find my period, I know it's between these two maximums. So I have a period of pi over 2. So once again, to find b, I'm going to set pi over 2 equal to 2 pi over b. So when I set that equal, I'm going to cross multiply 2 times pi to get 4 pi, pi times b to get b pi, divide both sides by pi, and I get that b equals 4. So if I am writing, so now I get to decide sine or cosine. So I'm looking here, my y-intercept is at the max. So this would be a cosine equation with no vertical shift. So it would look like this. So it'd be 1/2 cosine of 4x. Now, if I wanted to do sine, I would need to start in the middle. So I could either start right here, and that would be positive sine because I'm going up first. Or I could pick this point right here in which I'm going down first, and that would actually be negative sine. So for this problem, I am going to do that one. I'm going to pick that point. Now, I see that there are 4 marks that get us to pi over 2. So I'm going to take pi over 2 divided by 4, and I'll get pi over 8. So each mark is pi over 8. So once again, pi over 8 is not my c value because my phase shift is c over b. So I have to calculate that. So I'm setting c over 4 because I have a b value of 4 equal to pi over 8 because that's how far I'm moving. I'm going to cross multiply to get 8c equal to 4 pi, and I end up getting that once again my c value is pi over 2. I know because I'm moving to the right, I'm going to have minus pi over 2 in my equation, and it should look like this. So negative 1/2, again, because sine is going down first, so I reflected over the x-axis. Still 4x, because my period has not changed. And then minus pi over 2, again, to move us over that pi over 8. If you still have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope this was helpful. Thank you.